People called them the We Can Do It Boys, or Roosevelt's Tree Army, or the $1-a-day boys. Who were the men of the Civilian Conservation Corps? Where were they from? What did they do? They were nearly all young men. How did they feel about it? All of it. The work, the times, each other, the future. My father was one of them. I could have asked him these questions while he was alive, but I didn't. Whom can I ask now? How many of them are left? The Great Depression of the 1930s was many things to many people. To my two sets of grandparents, with their total of 12 young children, it was a decade of struggle in the middle of a lifetime of struggle. To my parents, it was the vivid setting of their teenage blossoming. To me, it was the dreamscape of my parents' youth. To economists, it was a problem to be understood. To moralists, it was the payback for the sins of the Jazz Age. To political scientists, a prelude to revolution, fascism, socialism, war, or all of these. To historians and social scientists, a chapter in the story of the emerging American character. To workers, a disaster with obscure sources, a hurricane that people had somehow made worse. 15 million of them were out of work by 1933, including more than half the men under 25. 2 million, including 250,000 teenagers, had hit the road, or the rails, looking to feed themselves. 100,000 businesses and 2,000 banks had shut their doors. 6 billion tons of topsoil were blowing off the land every year. 7/8 of the forests had been cut. For the urban unemployed, there were breadlines, soup kitchens, and political speechifiers. Across the ocean, struggling states were reinventing themselves as militarized totalitarianisms. The young people had their youth, and not a lot more. My father was one of these young people. He had more than most, a good expansive mind and a good expansive heart. He was a city kid through and through, born of immigrant parents who were poor even before their marriage disintegrated. My father was sensitive and street tough both, made good friends, was looked up to by his kid sisters and brother, read all the time, and knew what hunger felt like. His temperament was romantic and idealistic, in spite of the gritty tenement life on Manhattan's East Side. By age 17, he had settled on his life ambition, to be a serious writer. There was plenty for anyone to write about, from the Italian invasion of Ethiopia to the great dust storms in the American Southwest. Within a year, the Spanish Civil War erupted, Max Schmeling KO'd Joe Louis, Jesse Owens took the gold at the Berlin Olympics, King Edward VIII abdicated. My father, observing everything, was full of a young man's hopes, dreams, desires, and apprehensions too. Some great collective convulsion was coming, and he was poised to take his part in it, to understand it, and maybe to express its meaning in written words. City boys who couldn't find work were flocking into the Civilian Conservation Corps, vanishing into the West for a year or so, and returning full of stories. My father signed up as well, even though he had just fallen in love with a girl he'd met some time before in night high school. He reported to Camp Dix, New Jersey, for training, quickly made new friends, and began sending letters and photos back to the girl. After a few days' training, he was ready to be shipped out west. The adventure had begun. In his first months in office in 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt got Congress to launch the Civilian Conservation Corps as part of his New Deal. The C.C.C. had an inevitable logic. It put wasted labor resources together with wasted natural resources. It moved unemployed young men from cities, towns, and failing farms to the countryside to fight forest fires and soil erosion, to build roads, dams, bridges, irrigation projects, trails, and recreational facilities, to aid in pest control and disaster relief, to stock lakes and rivers, to clean up beaches and waterways, to plant trees, over 3 billion in all, which make shade for us today. The program was immensely successful. Every state had C.C.C. camps, situated miles from the nearest towns, each holding a company of about 200, including camps for Native American and African American workers. 3 million men passed through over 2,600 camps between 1933 and 42, in places as separated from each other as Long Island, Alaska, and Hawaii, and every place in between. Michigan, Arizona, Vermont, Puerto Rico, Kentucky, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Mexico, and every other state. The Army ran the camps, and the Department of Agriculture and Department of the Interior administered them. Older skilled workers mentored the enrollees, who were paid $1 a day, keeping $5 a month for pocket money while the rest was routed to their families at home. The men were given training and optional classroom courses, were conditioned to work hard, learned to work together, developed skills in a whole array of crafts and methods, including the use of tools and machinery of all kinds, and, for many of the men, the handling of the heavier equipment that would provide them with jobs in their later lives. They were formed into crews and trucked to and from the daily work sites, worked in weather of all kinds, and built things skillfully enough and strongly enough to bear steady use by the public, even into our own time. Enrollees took care of their own barracks, were given free medical care, and were well fed. Camaraderie was high, and most enrollees departed the program with useful skills, self-discipline, and good memories. Their hard work helped them and the nation as a whole survive the darkest years of the Depression, and helped build the recovery of both the economy and the land itself. By the time Congress ended the program in July 1942, a new global struggle had eclipsed the old, and the ex-C.C.C. men were ready yet again to do their part. When my father said goodbye to his Camp Dix friends in August of '36, in the peak period of the C.C.C., and headed by train for Rupert, Idaho, he was beginning a journey at least as spiritual as physical, with meanings only he could have deciphered. In Camp BR 27, my father's company, 3236, went to work rip-rapping local canals and dams. He talked happily in one of his first letters to Josie Greco, the girl back home, of, quote, a chance to sweat in the sun and go to bed with aching muscles. Though this kind of heavy work didn't really suit him temperamentally. He quickly won the job of doctor's assistant and spent his days in the 8-bed infirmary, where he also had his own room, something like this one, with bunk, radio, and books. Young workers found many ways to hurt themselves, and he handled most emergencies himself. In his free time, he hunted antelope and encountered other creatures. For leisure, he swam with his friends at the dam. He had eagerly joined the staff of the camp newspaper and took these photos. Here, Captain Sloan makes the announcement that the company team has won the tourney. My father won praise for his writing skills and said in one letter, quote, still expect to do big things in that line. Rupert was not New York, but it had sidewalks and ice cream parlors, and places for the young men to, quoting my father, get drunk and raise hell. Naturally, there were local girls, though my father was in this period intensely focused on one girl back home, to whom he wrote letter after letter, sometimes two a day, pouring out his ideals, ambitions, insights, and declarations of love. It was unfortunately a one-way flow of passion, and he had plenty of time to think. Here with a pup he adopted named Sage. Time also to explore the rugged beauty of the world he was in, so different from the cramped world he had come from. Time to brood about the world's hugeness and his own brimming spirit, a spirit too intense, apparently, for the girl back home to understand, much less love. Finally, in mid-October 36, he and others were shipped off to a new camp, taking the long train ride through the countryside, writing in a shaking hand as the train swayed, quote, "The panorama of beauty that glides past the train window. But gosh, how I wish I was with you, even in Central Park."
I knew that the C.C.Cs helped me. I had been out of high school. I was working part-time, could not find a steady job, and I went into the C.C.Cs gladly when I had the opportunity, soon after it was formed. I weighed 98 pounds when I went in, and 10 months later, when I left, I weighed more than 30 pounds more.
We got those wool, 100% wool, two-piece underwear, long johns, and we got the OD pants. We call them ankle chokers because you had to take your shoes off, sometimes your socks, in order to get those OD pants on. And they had two sizes, either too big or too small.
I, being a youngster, although most of them didn't know that, being all of 115 pounds and 5'7.5" tall, I was a skinny little boy, like the kid on the sand with Atlas kicking the sand in his face. That was me. December came, got cold, the rivers froze, so I spent a lot of time working in the kitchen. So I got fattened up in a hurry.
A fire started just outside of our camp and it crowned out. Now, back in those days, when a fire crowned out, that means it went right up into the trees and just rushes through the trees and it sounds like a freight train. The only thing we could do, as the foreman said, is run like hell and pray for rain.
Fighting forest fires is a dangerous job, and people sometimes want to fight forest fires because they think it's something romantic about it, I guess, but it's not.
And then after you get the fire stopped, then you go all around it and cut down all the dead trees or anything that's near. Everything was by hand.
They had a big fire over in Wyoming when C.C. boys got burned up, and I wanted to go. And I went down to sign up, and that guy used to be my teacher, and he says, "You go home and wait 3 more months and then come back."
I was in a family of 7. My father and the 2 boys worked for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. They all lost their jobs in the latter part of 1929 and early 30. All of the 4, I was the youngest, had to leave home to find an occupation however they could. So we lost within that year. We could not pay the mortgage on the house. We lost the house. The family had to split, go wherever they could, and the times were very rough for us.
Many of us, we were in dire straits, I would say. And when you joined the C.C.Cs, I did it because my mother needed the help. We were 10 children, and I was the baby.
I was taught how to use explosives. I was fooling around. I was a young kid, you know. So instead of making a long fuse, I made a short fuse. And they called me Short Fuse Mickey. They would run, I would run too.
Commander would have to authorize a truck service to go to town to walk the streets and do a thing. Hamburger, I think 5 cents, and a Coke, and if you went to a movie, it was 25 cents. Some of the people had dances on a Saturday night. They let us go up there and dance, but coming from the farm, I didn't know how to dance, so we got to watch them, and it had a little fun that way.
You know, we chase girls like every teenager does, you know. There are quite a few farm girls around Golden. One of them still there. She's married to a man that runs a dairy, which she is a real trooper then. And I imagine she still is. I'd like to get back in touch with her because I think she's still alive.
I met my wife up at this camp, this summer camp up at Mount Adams. She was up there with her family and her uncle and aunt. There's 2 or 3 tents with all the kids and all. I saw her standing there, and I jammed on brakes and slowed down real good and took another look and went on to camp, dropped the boys off and went back. And anyway, we got married and about a month later. We got about 10 or 12 great-grandkids scattered all around.
The best thing that ever happened to me is I met my wife. I met her at a dance 2 weeks before Christmas at American Legion Hall in Orfino, Idaho. And I danced with her more than the guy that brought her. She was working at the Orfino Cafe for 15 cents an hour plus tips and 1 meal. She was a University of Idaho student, and she was trying to earn some money to go back to college. Well, she never made it because she and I got married in June.
For my father, love's journey would not make such a quick and happy story. After 2 days on the train, he arrived in Alturas, California, and then was delivered to a camp nestled in the dry hills of the Jess Valley along the Pitt River. Here he spent his workdays building fences and reservoirs, with his mind unengaged except for his own thoughts and daydreams. For recreation, there was hiking and swimming in the cold river water. But once winter set in, there was only a weekly in-house movie and endless snow shoveling to distract him from the faltering letter romance with Josie Greco. By mid-December they were quarreling, and by month's end the correspondence had virtually ceased. There were now only local diversions for my disappointed father. The Niles Hotel in Alturas, which had a bar and a dance floor. In contrast with his Camp Minidoka keepsakes, there were no photos of friends from Camp Juniper Flats. This June 37 photo, taken shortly after my father had left the camp, was provided to me by the much older incarnation of this young fellow, Albert Vercruci, who arrived at camp only days after my father had left. This shot that Albert took of retreat formation caught my eye because of the dog. Albert had trouble remembering its name, and then it came to him, Sage. This was the dog that had come with my father from Idaho. Sharing him was as close as he and Albert came to knowing each other, for my father was already on his way back home when this photo was taken. Though he had declared in his letters that he was no believer in fate, the mysterious process of lives crossing each other, almost crossing or never crossing, must have been on my father's mind as he traveled back toward my mother, his hopes hanging by threads. Behind him was an experience and a world which, though beautiful and even glorious, had already begun its fade into the past.
I was a new assistant professor at Cornell University. Madam Frances Perkins came the month after to be a visiting lecturer for a year or so. We became very good friends. She told me how the C.C.C. got started in the cabinet members in the following way. She said, we were all sitting around the table like we usually were, and Franklin said, what are we going to do about these young boys? We have to do something. So he went around to everybody who would speak, and he liked one idea and said, all right, that's a good idea, we'll follow through on that. And you, and you, and you, and you, take care of that, and let me know quickly. And she said, we did.
We felled trees and buck trees and burnt slash in the wintertime.
Cutting lake ice for the kitchen and for the field people. And that stuff lasted well through the summer. We had ice cold water, ice cold lemonade, everything.
The money of $5 that I got, I did not spend too unwisely during the month. The $25 that I sent home meant a great deal to my parents.
Oh, they were happy to get the $25 a month. Oh, it was a godsend. We had a family of 8.
The day after payday, there were about 4 people that had money, and everybody else were broke because of the crap game that went on in the men's room.
I looked out the window and looked close and said, where in the world is the trees and the grass?
They said, we don't have it out there. This is desert. I said, well, what's it good for if you ain't got no trees and grass?
I didn't know there was so much expansive room with nobody using it. Because back where I was, we lived in a tenement, and every floor was full of people.
This was built in 1936, when the C.C.Cs was formed. And this over here is the glacier itself. And it's receding about 2 feet every year.
And of course, the first thing we did is I played baseball in high school. And so we got a baseball team so we could compete around there with Bowery and Irwin and Freedom, Wyoming on Sundays.
Our job was to plant trees, and I drove a truck and hauled crews to work, ground a lot of lime that went to the farms.
I left school when I was in the 8th grade, and I finished in 3 Cs. You had to do it on your own time. That was the only drawback.
I did go to college immediately after the C.C.Cs, after 10 months, and never got out.
Well, it was just one happy family. As far as I know, we all got along good and happy and everything.
And we'd sit there, we'd strap a knife onto a stick, and we'd stand on this log, and a fish would swim under it, and we'd spear them. And every Sunday down at the mess hall, we had fish fry. I don't think there's a game warden around here. I hope not, anyway.
I stayed there till they wouldn't let me stay any longer.
But it was a good experience. Good experience.
And they was a good bunch of guys. I mean, there's nothing that they wouldn't do for you, you know what I mean? And we watched out for each other, and we learned how to work.
You know, meeting people from all other parts of the country, that was the greatest part of it. And they tell you about their lives, where they came from, where they went to school.
One of the things that the C.C.Cs did for me, it made me very strong. Made me very, very strong. It was a good lesson for me for the rest of my life. Words really can't describe it. It was a new life for me. I remembered that all my life.
You had a chance to see the country for free. They paid you for it. And it was really a wonderful adventure.
It was the greatest thing that ever happened in this country, in my opinion, because it gave these people something to do, some direction. It gave them a job. It kept them out of trouble. When you take a couple of hundred boys from 17 to 21, 40 miles from town, what are they going to do?
Well, you know, I think that they didn't pay any attention to their father or grandfather when he was trying to tell them about his C.C.Cs. And all of a sudden, after they're gone, he said, well, he was in the C.C.Cs, and now they're talking about that, and I'd like to know something about it. But it's too late. In most cases, it's too late.
I want to tell you, the C.C.Cs gave this guy a real chance, just like he did thousands of kids all over the country.
I learned discipline. I learned to work and do a good job. And I learned fellowship. It was enjoyable. Hard work, but so enjoyable.
To me, an expedition into the past is worth some real persistence, as long as what I'm after is truly personal. My father never did become a writer, though he did win my mother's love when their lives crossed again quite by chance, some years after his great heartbreak and after the Great Depression was a memory. But who was the earlier version of him? And what did he once feel that he never spoke about in his mature life, but that you could hear in his tone whenever he began a sentence with, "When I was in the seas"? What was that haunting sound of a beauty bygone and lost? Lost except in the letters sent to that girl back home, who saved them long after he himself had gone back into the earth. Did his young comrades in the barracks dream about the future just as he did? And did the unfolding of their actual lives reveal its necessary logic to them once they were old men looking back? And is that why they're so light-hearted about past and present? Still, we, their children and grandchildren, want to know things. How did their world turn into the one we're in, and their lives yield our lives, and the meaning they saw recede into the meaning we see? How do the struggles of their time teach us to face the struggles of our own? So often, the lost part of people, including ourselves, is the most beautiful part. That's why quests like this one are the opposite of somber. If anything, they're fun. Will there be an old man who remembers our young father, doing something or saying something, or getting into some mischief? Will there be a photo somewhere that froze a moment of his being? Even if not, the spirit of what we're looking for is still there in the people we meet on the way. What was true then is still true now.
Well, this is all there is left now. There's a bunch of stones, a lot of stones. It's all very flattened out, and that's the feeling too.
There were a lot of people here once, and a lot of people had a very good time, very interesting time. Maybe a hard time for some. And that's all gone, and they are all gone, and probably the few who are left will be gone too.